That's it. All right, guys, we have back and biceps today. We're starting with something new, so kind of new. Normally, we've been doing the lat pull downs. We're still doing a lat pull down, but we're doing this Panatta super lat machine convergent, literally reading the title. It's just a Panatta's version of a lat pull down. So it is plate loaded, and it is actually going to be isolateral, meaning we're able to work each side individually, but we are going to be working both sides at the same time. It's just the load is going to be on each side individually for this machine. The cool thing about this machine, or actually I'm getting ahead of myself, I don't think I've ever used this machine. Like, I mean, I've used it a couple times prior to this current video, but I don't think we've ever used it in a video, which is cool. But also prior to, I think like the past week or two of me using this, I don't think I've ever actually touched this machine other than when I went on a trip recently in Texas. The gym I was training at had this specific machine, and I said, hey, why not? Let's try it out. I ended up doing it, and I actually really liked it. And then as I was doing it, I was like, oh shit, I think Pure Muscle has this machine. So and behold, we do. So I've been using this for my past few back training days, which I really like. So we're gonna get right into it. We are gonna focus on intensity, same as always. Keep the intensity high, push the amount of weight as much as we can. Obviously minimize the ego lifting and focus on the form and execution of every single movement. So we're just gonna get right into it. I'll share kind of my tips on this specific machine. But look guys, if you're following this workout, you can use any lat pull down. Any machine works, does not matter. Whatever you prefer, we're gonna start off with lat pull downs. So if you are following along, any machine works. I don't know where I'm going with that. Okay, this is gonna be first working set. I should have mentioned I've already done 2 warm-up sets prior to this. So this is working set number 1. Again, not really going to failure on this. Probably gonna pyramid up in the weight since this is the first exercise of the actual workout. I'm gonna stop there. 10 reps, easy peasy. We're gonna go heavier. Now, the reason I actually really like this machine, first and foremost, all Panatta equipment, let me rephrase that. Again, I'm getting ahead of myself. All of Panatta back equipment, for the most part, is awesome. Their chest stuff, their leg stuff, not a fan. But the back stuff that they make, I'm a big fan of. Now, the reason I really like this is the resistance profile of this machine is really, like, it's heaviest through the mid-range, which is great because that's where we're strongest, and it's lightest through the extremes. So it's light at the beginning or lengthened range of this movement, or the starting position, sorry. And then as I pull, right around that mid-range is when it gets heaviest, but then it lightens up a lot towards this end range. So it just feels more efficient when I'm doing this. Because again, our muscles are generally strongest through that mid-range, and then we're gonna be weaker in the extreme. So we're pretty weak in the lengthened range, and then we're very weak in that end or shortened range. Hence why when you do regular lat pull downs, like on a cable, it gets really hard towards that end range. Like, it doesn't let up at all. So the resistance profile of that is more constant because of the cables and the pulleys, but it's linear based off of the strength curve of your actual lat. So meaning you're gonna be strongest through here, and then once you get through this end range, anatomically speaking, we're just weakest. So that's why we tend to struggle on a regular lat pull down, whereas this, we can kind of fight through it and it just feels good. So that's one big reason why I like this And then also it's, you know, isolateral, meaning I can just train each side individually. But as you see, we're doing both sides together, but each side is loaded, which is awesome. We got set number 2 here. We did go heavier. 8 to 12 reps is what we're aiming for. Pushing up the intensity a bit. I'm gonna get closer to failure on this. Second set. Ooh. 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 That was heavy. That was pretty heavy. I might try one more set there because I didn't anticipate it being that heavy. But worst case is, if the next set looks just as awful as that one, we'll go back down and wait. Throw on 25, so we'll do 2 and 25. Right now I'm doing 3 plates. I don't know if you guys can see with the camera. But, all right. I'm gonna rest. Goal for today for rest time too, condensing it. I wanna try to keep it maximum 90 seconds. I wanna try to speed things up for the workout today, get a good sweat going. If I feel like I need to rest a little longer, 100% I will. You know, talking in between each set also takes up energy too. So I'm gonna catch my breath. We're lightening that up. That is heavy. It's a bit heavy. Again, it's one of those things where it doesn't matter how long you're training, how long you've been working out for. You're used to what you're used to. I know that sounds obvious, but even when you switch to a brand new machine that you haven't really used ever, you know, there's that buffering period of figuring out, one, how does this feel? Kind of the resistance profile of it. And then you're also kind of gauging how heavy you think you can go. So 2 plates on this feels pretty light, but then 3, I don't think I've actually ever done 3. I just assumed, yeah, I could do another plate. Got 12, no problem with 2. It's, you know, it's pretty heavy. So point is doesn't matter how much experience you have, sometimes you get it wrong and you got to decrease the weight. But that is why we're not lifting with our ego, because if we attached our ego to it, I'd be like, no, fuck that. We're fucking staying here and sacrificing our form and throwing the weight around. And then it just looks stupid. All right. What set was that? I think we'll do 2 more here. I think I technically did 3. I can't remember. We'll do 2 more. I think we'll do 5 because the first set didn't really feel that hard. It was still kind of like warm-up territory. All right. Let's do this. It was a bit better. 4th and final set. A few things I want you guys to think about. Again, I'm harping on this. You want to make sure that the machine is set up properly before you actually start doing your working sets. What I mean by that is you want to make sure that the seat height or these leg pads are adjusted properly to best fit you. Now, one way to gauge that is you want to make sure that the seat is high enough up, not too high where you're sacrificing your range of motion, but high enough up where you're not actually getting ripped out of the seat. Now, some of these machines you can't adjust the height, so sometimes it is what it is. But then in terms of the actual leg pad, you want to bring this leg pad down as far down as you comfortably can, enough to keep your legs locked in position so that you can create leg drive to drive into these pads to keep your hips down the entire time. Because the whole focus of this exercise of a lat pull down is to target these lower lats, right? You're going to be targeting overall the lat, but let's say you're focusing primarily, or at least loading majority of those lower lat fibers that connect to your hip. So if your hip's not locked and stable, then you're basically just losing tension through the movement, and you're using a lot of unnecessary momentum to get the weight going. So if my hips are bouncing up and down on this seat, I'm just losing tension. I'm not actually creating stretch or length in the actual target muscle. So that's what I want you to focus on in terms of the actual setup. Now, in terms of the execution of each rep, I want you to keep your chest up the entire time. As you pull, I want you actually initiating every rep by driving shoulders and elbows down and back. So almost like you're trying to drive elbows and shoulders down towards your hips, okay? I don't want you thinking about initiating the rep with your arms, so to speak. So I'm not thinking about pulling through my hand to initiate the rep, because what that's gonna do is this is gonna cause me to use a lot more of my biceps. And I say that with air quotes because I'm going to be using my biceps regardless, but if I'm thinking about pulling through my hand, I'm less likely going to be thinking about what my shoulders are doing. And if I'm not thinking about what my shoulders are doing, then I'm most likely going to be rounding my shoulders forward like this, because I'm only thinking about a distance traveled. So I'm literally just thinking about bringing this handle from here to here, trying to get it as close to me as possible. So instead of that, again, I want you thinking about driving and initiating every rep with your shoulders and elbows first. So you're pulling through your shoulders and elbows, driving them down towards your hips or down towards the ground. Again, keeping that chest up. You don't want to be rounded forward like this. I'm not assisting with my abs to pull that handle down. I'm keeping that chest up, and I'm almost thinking about driving my chest up towards the ceiling. And then lastly, squeezing everything in my back, okay? So don't worry about the depth in which your hands can come down. Just focus on pulling elbows as far down as you comfortably can, and that's going to be your range. Don't worry about bringing everything as close as possible. And that's pretty much it. So control every rep, control that eccentric. But again, don't get too carried away with controlling the eccentric. If it's a 1 second eccentric, that's completely fine. Just keep the tempo consistent through the entire set. You don't want to be so slow one rep and then really fast the next, and then like a half rep the next. You want to keep everything pretty consistent. Okay, last set. Come on. As you start to struggle, one thing you may notice is you want to start bending forward, because again, your body's trying to look for that path of least resistance. So it's going to start recruiting other muscles or doing certain movements to sort of make the movement easier. So keep that chest up the entire time. I could even feel myself when I start to fatigue. I notice I'm starting to do this, but I'm forcing my chest up. Even if that means I'm only doing half reps or partial reps towards the end, in my opinion, that's way more important than trying to complete a full rep and then your form is just completely shit. The rest of the reps made sense. That last rep was just completely off. It does nothing. So yes, control. And then focus on the range, like get a deep stretch in those lats. So I'm just focused on pushing shoulders up, getting that stretch. I'm not necessarily focused on lengthening or straightening or extending my elbow. So if you notice in the video, you may see that my elbows are always somewhat bent, and I'm just getting the stretch through my, like by pushing my shoulder up, by elevating it, getting that stretch, and then driving down. So I'm almost initiating it like this, as opposed to like an arm movement. Okay, we're gonna move on. I don't exactly know what I want to do because the machine I wanted to use is broken. Cool, love that. We are gonna do this, but I think we're gonna finish with the Panatta Pullover. I've actually used this before and I actually kind of like it, but we're gonna finish with that because that's more of like a stretched movement. I'm loading the lats in more of a lengthened position. So I don't want to do that yet. I'd rather save that towards the end. Okay, it'll be a surprise for the both of us. I'll see you at the next exercise. All right, we're doing just regular seated rows, seated cable rows. Now, I've gone through this a couple other times in the past, how I don't like the mag grips. And the reason being is just the handle. I hate that handle position, how it's kind of inward like this and it kinks your wrist. They're great though, because it offers you different widths, sorry. Now, when you're doing something like a seated cable row, you want to be essentially, if your goal is to target the lats, you want to be rowing somewhere within your shoulder width. There's nothing inherently wrong using those narrow grips, the one I used in my previous video and I talked a bit about. But the issue arises as you get to that end range where your elbows start flaring outward. So you're unable to really tuck your elbows in, or it just feels very restrictive. So you want to use something that allows you to have a shoulder width grip. Now, what I prefer using, and I haven't been able to use in a long time for one main reason, is this Prime adjustable, I don't know what this is called, attachment for literally whatever you want it for. You could do bicep curls, but for this case, we're using it for rows. Now, the reason I'm unable to always use this is because people, unfortunately, take these carabiners off and they use them for other things around the gym. And they only use these specific carabiners. You can't use this one here that's kind of like teardrop shaped. You have to use these wider ones. So I found this today. It was already set up perfectly. Love it. Now, the cool thing is I can adjust this to whatever width works best for me, right? So it has these sort of increments on the inside here, and you can adjust the carabiner to whatever width you have, and then you can hook on whatever grip you actually prefer using. That's why this is so cool. So you're not restricted to the mag grips where you can't even use wrist straps on. You can use these and you can go heavy. You can tie your wrist strap on. So that's pretty cool. This is the setup for today. Now, the goal is to target the lats primarily. So I want to keep myself upright the entire time, or even slightly lean forward. I don't want to be leaning back too much. So I want to create as much range of motion in my lats that I can. Yeah, we're going to get right into it. I've already done a couple warm-up sets, and I did one working set. So this is going to be the second working set now. Rep range, again, nothing crazy, 10 to 12. But like, if I get more, I get more. I'm just trying to push it. We're gonna go a bit heavier. Now, just to show you, again, to illustrate my point of the mag grip, why I don't like them. This is cool. The fact that I can adjust the sort of angle of the handles, but what I can't stand is this angle of the actual hand grip itself, of the mag grip. I don't like that they're flared, and I hate how you can't adjust that. Personally, I think it would just be better if it was just a bar on the inside that just allowed you to adjust. So that's why. The flared is stupid because it just keeps my wrists, when I want to tuck elbows, my wrists are kinked, and then I start getting what's called active insufficiency, where my grip starts to run out because I'm trying to make a fist, but I'm also flexing my forearm and that leads to what's called active insufficiency. So like you literally just can't create tension anymore, and you actually start losing, you know, grip strength. Like you can literally try it, make a fist as hard as you can, and then curl in. You'll start to notice like your hand wants to open up like this. So, and then also I can't wrap these around. Stupid. It was cool when it first came out, but I'll take the cylinders over the mag grip any day. Okay, third set. We got 4 here total, and we did go heavier. Okay. Got one more set. Go heavier. For the form for this seated cable row, now, once you figure out your attachment that we just talked about, again, there's nothing inherently wrong by using a more narrow attachment. That's completely fine. The principles of this movement is still going to apply regardless of the attachment you're using, so long as you're holding more of a narrow grip. If you notice, I'm not incorporating much of my spinal erectors anymore like I did in the previous back video. If you guys watched it, I was doing more of a leaning forward and then pulling all the way back, because intentionally I wanted to work my spinal erectors on top of everything else in my back. So for this, the focus primarily is the lats. We're keeping ourselves locked in position the entire time, mainly because we're actually running out of range. If I even lean forward, I'm bottoming out the stack because of this attachment, because it's so long. I'm keeping myself upright the entire time. I'm not fully arching my back. I'm just keeping myself in more of a neutral spine. Just keeping upright. Next, I'm leaning slightly forward, holding a neutral grip. Now, if you're someone of a shorter stature or you have sort of a smaller torso, I recommend placing like a yoga block or even a bumper plate or stacking a couple plates rather, and sitting on top of that, just so that you're aligned with the cables, okay? So as you pull, those cables aren't gonna be higher up than your actual arm, or the line of pull rather. So you wanna keep that line of pull, which is the cable, aligned through your forearm into your elbow the entire time as you're pulling. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. It's hard for me to describe without actually doing it, but you'll see when I get into it in a second. The reason being is that's going to place more tension on your lat and less on your bicep. If the cable's higher up and you're pulling down like this and the cable comes across and your elbow sinks below that cable, well, now if you notice, some of that tension is now going into that bicep, okay? So you want to keep your forearm in line, or your elbow elevated almost above the line of pull, so that you're using less bicep, because the goal isn't to necessarily train the bicep in this movement. We want, you know, the limiting factor to be primarily our lats and not our grip or our biceps. So if you are shorter, stack some plates up, sit a little higher. And then lastly is keep your feet planted, preferably higher. The higher up you can have your feet, the more stability you're gonna have and the more you're able to keep your hips down. Because if you have your feet low, sometimes in the past I would keep my feet low, but that's because I didn't have like the flexibility in my hips, or even my hamstrings were super tight, that it would actually hurt more here. And this became a limiting factor, believe it or not, because I'd be uncomfortable through here. I couldn't maintain this position. But once you build up that mobility, try to keep your feet higher up, because if they are lower, you're just, you know, you don't have enough surface area to push off of, and then you're more likely going to be elevating up in the movement. That weight's going to pull you forward. So you want to keep your feet higher up. That way you keep yourself stable, and most of that force is going through, you know, your hips into the feet. Similar to like if you were doing a bent over row. That's pretty much the setup I want you thinking about. Now, in terms of the actual execution of every single rep, again, I want you focused on driving that shoulder down and elbow down and back behind you, but also like you're trying to wrap that elbow around your back. So I'm driving my tricep into my lat, squeezing them as hard as I can, and I'm almost trying to like wrap my elbows around my back to fully shorten the lat, okay? Because to visualize this, the lats insert up here on the humerus, generally speaking, somewhere up here on your humerus. And then the origin is going to be through your hip and then running along your spine. So my whole thought process as I'm doing any rowing is I'm thinking about, especially if my goal is to target the lats, is I want to bring this point and roughly somewhere through here, that point, as close together as possible, okay? So I'm not going to be rotating. If I was doing single arm, I wouldn't be rotating. Because I'm doing double arm, I'm thinking about driving elbows down and back, but then I'm thinking about almost wrapping those elbows around my back, because again, I'm thinking about bringing those 2 points as close together, the insertion and the origin as close together. So we're holding a neutral grip. If anything, I like to hold slightly, you know, supinated. Full stretch, protracting those shoulders forward, getting that deep stretch, and then again, driving shoulders and elbows down towards the ground, almost like I'm trying to scrape my elbows on the ground. Okay, we're gonna move on. We're gonna do like a low to high row, work some of that upper back, some of those traps. 3 sets there. I'm gonna figure out if I want to do a machine or a free weight. So see you there. I think I'm gonna change it up today. We're gonna do some Smith machine bent over rows. But reason being is I want to show you guys, you know, new movements that I may not have done yet or that you guys might be wondering how to do. For this one, we're treating this kind of like a low to high row or a low row. So in other words, I want to keep my torso angle somewhat higher up because I want to target more of that upper back and traps. So almost like a Dorian Yates style row. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. I don't know if there's any more I can explain on that. Now, some of you might be wondering, okay, this isn't optimal because your chest isn't supported and you're going to be using a lot more lower back and more of that posterior chain to keep yourself stable. Wouldn't it be better to do a machine that allows you to keep your chest supported like a T-bar row or something like that? Yeah, you're right. But the thing is this is also towards the latter half rather, of my workout. So I don't have to go as heavy as I normally would if I was doing this in the beginning. Now, if I was doing this in the beginning of my workout, yeah, I'd probably want to opt for a machine because that would completely, you know, my limiting factor would be all those other muscles we talked about, like my, you know, hips, hamstrings, and especially lower back and core. And then that would kind of ruin the rest of my workout. So I think the fact that this is towards the latter half of my workout, and I could be wrong, maybe there's studies on this, my sort of rationale is that I don't have to go as heavy. So therefore, I'm not loading myself nearly as much, if that makes sense. It's all relative though, because I'm later in the workout, I'm going to be more tired anyways, so I can't go as heavy. First set, even though it's just a plate, treating this as a working set. 3 working sets here. I know that wasn't failure. I want to go a bit heavier. We're going to stay focused though. For these last 2 sets, what I want you guys thinking about is you're going to use a stance, a foot stance that you normally would when you're squatting, something that keeps you stable, something roughly shoulder width or a little wider. Next is, if you notice in the beginning of the rep, I come up straight just to kind of set everything. And the reason being is it's much more difficult for me to set everything up in this position. I know this rack, I can start it from any depth or any height, but I like to come up first, sort of lock everything down, and then come down into sort of like a stiff leg deadlift. The reason being is I can almost proprioceptively feel where I am in space, where my hips are, easier that way with under load, as opposed to starting here with no real load and then unlocking it, it feels weird and I don't feel like I'm fully set up. So that's what I recommend, is stand up first with that weight, load everything up, and then perform almost like a stiff leg to lower down in the movement. Next, as you row, I want you thinking about, first and foremost, is protracting. So pushing your shoulders down towards the ground, getting that distance between your shoulder blades, opening everything up, creating that stretch in your back. And then as you pull, same thing, is I'm now retracting almost. So pulling, not almost, I'm retracting my shoulders and pulling my elbows as far back as they comfortably can go, keeping my elbow aligned with that line of pull, which is going to be this bar on this machine here. So I'm not pulling away from it, I'm just pulling in the direction that this machine moves. It sounds easy and sounds simple, but you'd be surprised that some people do things, you know, completely, you know, wrong. I shouldn't say completely wrong, it sounds bad, but people do things in a way that is not optimal. This will be the second working set. You'll see what I mean by my form. Now I am arching my back through this movement. So I'm keeping that chest up, pushing my ass out as far as I can. Basically inviting anybody behind me in, you know what I mean? Kidding. Kidding, relax. Okay. Man, that's heavy. Okay, next thing too is, you know, it's okay to be moving through the movement. Okay, so if you notice, I am rocking a little bit. That's completely fine. I just don't want to be ego lifting to the point where I'm literally doing like a deadlift to get that weight up. Okay, but a little bit of torso movement, a little bit of movement through the moving through the movement, sorry, is completely fine, and that's not cheating. So long as you're intentional and controlled, and you kind of know what you're doing, and you're intentionally targeting those upper back muscles. Okay, pulling literally as far back as I can. That's literally all I'm thinking about. Okay, third and final set. Again, trying to keep myself as stable as possible. I know I'm losing stability because I'm you know, my chest isn't supported, so I'm having to use all my hips and lower back muscles to keep myself stable, but you know, that's fine. I'm just trying to keep myself locked and stable. That's it. Okay, we're gonna move on to some machine pullovers, like the one I showed you in the beginning, the Panatta one. So I'll see you there. I want to answer this question. One of you asked, specifically Pablo CT4. Just a quick question. I have problems using straps because neglecting forearms and having to train them separately makes it more complex to hit it, and arms. I think you meant hit forearms and arms without intervening with biceps or triceps training. So when in the workout should I train forearms, and in what day? Thanks. This is a great question. I think train forearms at the end of your workout on like a back day, let's say. So save them towards the end of your training session, just so they don't interfere with your actual back training, because the whole focus is, you know, to train your back. So you want to make sure that your arms are, you know, recovered and your grip strength's recovered, things like that. So I do like tacking forearms at the end of my back day, just because I'm already hitting them that day and I may as well give a little more isolation. Second, personally, I enjoy training forearms at the beginning of my arm days, just because I treat it almost like if I'm training legs, I train my calves beforehand. Now I know they're completely different because your forearms and your grip might get weak and that could interfere with your arm training. I totally understand that. If that is the case for you, then again, save them towards the end of your workout, or you can even add them on to like a leg day. There is no right or wrong. There is no best day to add them. You can add them onto whatever day works best. I suggest add them onto a day that you can commit to and that you can hit consistently, because that's what matters the most. It doesn't matter really what day you train them on. So put them on a day that you know for certain that you're going to be able to target and train your forearms, and dedicate time to training them. And it doesn't have to be much. It can be like literally 10, 15 minutes of training, a couple exercises at most, 3 to 4 sets. And again, you know, be weary of taking them right to failure right away, because they are smaller muscle groups. So you want to build that strength up gradually over time. You don't want to go so heavy into wrist curls and things like that, like I've mentioned on previous forearm training videos. So that's kind of my 2 cents, is any day works, doesn't matter. And then in terms of beginning or post, find out what works best for you. So for instance, again, if you're training them on your back day, probably best to save them at the end. If you're training them on your arm day, I don't think it really matters, or even on a shoulder day. Definitely doesn't matter for chest and shoulders. So great question though. And definitely keep using straps if you can. Don't neglect using straps thinking, oh, I'm going to train forearms instead on my back day because I'm not using straps. You're just doing your back a disservice, in my honest opinion. You're much better off training your forearms a couple exercises for a couple sets, a couple times a week. Really shouldn't take you that long. You could definitely do it. So great question though. Thank you. I'm going to show you guys a little hack that you can use with your wrist straps. So when if you have one of these pullover machines, I like to attach my wrist straps to the top here, and they act as handles so I can keep my arms straight. Because as you noticed in that warm-up set, I had my arms straight the entire time. I didn't have them bent. It just allows me to kind of feel more of my lat and focus on driving elbows down as opposed to like pulling, if that makes sense. Even though I am pulling. You'll see what I mean though. Okay, hold on. What am I doing here? There we go. Okay. All right. So if you notice, I'm using my wrist straps on that back bar there, and I'm actually wrapping my hands around it. So I'm emulating like a cable rope pullover. That's why I love using those. It's actually a great hack. 2, I forgot to buckle myself in. Safety first. Now this will help keep you stable, keeps your hips down, which is what you want. Most importantly is you want to set the seat height up low enough so that your shoulder joint is aligned with this axis of rotation here, okay? Now have the seat low enough that as you raise your arms up, that should still be in line, okay? Sometimes when you're seated here, it looks like it's in line, and then when you raise your shoulders up, you actually are sitting way higher, and then the resistance feels a little weird. So next, as I'm holding onto my straps, I'm trying to keep my arms or elbows tucked relatively, not too much where I'm like restricted, but enough where I can focus more on my lats and not having them flared out. If I have them flared out, you'll still feel your lat, but I also think you might feel a bit more in your pec. And this goes into my next thing, is stay within the range of motion of your lat. You can go super deep into a deep stretch. There's nothing wrong with that, but keep that in mind that the more you go past, let's say right around here, or roughly 120 degrees of shoulder flexion, you're actually getting into more of your pec. So now your pec is going to be taking over. and your lat has actually no leverage in that position. So therefore you're not really going to be putting much tension on the lat anymore. It goes into your pec to pull your shoulder forward, okay? So staying sort of from here to here is going to be all lat, and then anything outside, I mean, it feels like a good stretch, but at that point you're just kind of stretching your pecs and your shoulders. So again, nothing inherently wrong, just something to keep in mind. And then lastly, as I'm driving, as I initiate each rep, I want to drive my shoulders up. So again, I'm pushing shoulders up and then driving elbows and shoulders down, keeping that chest up the entire time. You can kind of keep, you know, yourself leaned forward a little bit. If you feel a bit more tension in your lat, that's completely fine. But what I don't want you guys doing is starting here with extension and then crunching in and rounding your spine. You don't want this to be a spine movement where you're, you know, basically doing an ab crunch to get the weight going. You want to just keep your torso locked in a position and then strictly focus on driving shoulders and elbows down towards the ground or towards, you know, your hips, squeezing those lats. And that's pretty much it. Okay, last set here, guys. Oh, shit. Oh. Okay, we're supersetting these last two, as you guys just saw. Minimal rest in between for 3 working sets. Now I'm starting with, on the superset, with straight bar standing bicep curls, just to focus, you know, more of that mid-range. I can still use free weights here, no problem. So if you guys, you know, are in a pinch and you only have dumbbells, 100%, you can use the dumbbells over the straight bar on the cable. It's the same resistance profile for both. So just loading primarily that mid-range and then coming here and focusing more in that beginning or lengthened range on the bicep for the incline curls. So they actually complement each other really well. It's not really redundant. Going right to failure for these two, because I'm doing a superset as well. I just want to target each of these very efficiently and just focus, you know, getting as close to failure on both of these movements. So we're gonna get focused, and on the final set, I'm gonna run through the form with you guys. Oh. Oh man. Now you've seen other people online, even myself included in previous videos, that I've had this angle of this backrest, you know, pretty damn low. That's completely fine, whatever feels comfortable. Sometimes I do it strictly because I actually want to focus more on my shoulder. Of that, it sounds weird, it's a bicep movement, but because my arm is, you know, extended behind my torso in like an extreme position, because this incline is set down far, I feel a lot of a stretch in my front delt, and sometimes it actually feels kind of therapeutic. And then other times it completely bothers my shoulder, or sometimes I just feel it too much in my shoulder and less in my bicep. So I kind of have it at like in, you know, your conventional range for an incline bicep curl. In other words, set the backrest up. You know, I have it set to 45 degrees or 35 degrees. Set it to a position that feels comfortable for you. In other words, that you don't feel it too much in your shoulders, or you find you have to like manipulate your shoulder in a position just to get in that position. Sorry, manipulate your shoulder to get into that position. You don't want it to be uncomfortable. So have it to a position that's comfortable enough that you feel a deep stretch in your bicep, but not so much where it's, you know, affecting your actual workout and not allowing you to push into heavier weight. So yeah, that's the gist of the angle of the backrest. Okay, we got one more set. We're gonna start here. I'm gonna explain the form for that first, and then we'll go here and I'll explain the form there. All right guys, for this standing cable bicep curl, we're using the straight bar. And if you notice, I'm using a pretty long straight bar. I'm not using just one of these narrow ones. Now again, there's nothing wrong with using a narrow one, but one thing I like to keep in mind is my arm path. On any movement I'm doing, any exercise I'm doing, I'm thinking about the path of the joint, especially the active joint or the working joint, in terms of the actual target muscle. So what I mean by that is I want to have a grip width that's allowing me to work in the, you know, arm path, or in the path, sorry, of my actual arm, or of my forearm in this case. So in other words, if I point my biceps forward and then I curl up, well, if you notice, my hands are actually going to be slightly outside of my shoulders. So I want to hold a width of almost outside of my shoulder width. That's why I like using a wider bar, because if I use a narrow bar, I'm more internally rotated, and I find that causes a lot more pain and discomfort in my shoulder by curling like this. So again, it is preference, it's not a big deal, but I'm using a wider bar for that reason. So once you establish your grip width, next, like I mentioned, is you want to keep those biceps pointed straight the entire time. So you're almost, you don't want to be externally rotated fully, but you want to externally rotate enough that your biceps are pointed straight to the wall in front of you. And then lastly, you want to, you know, stand a good distance from the actual cable machine, far enough back that you're targeting more of that mid-range. Now, what I mean by that is, as I curl, you're going to notice that the cable is around 90 degrees with my wrist. Once that cable hits 90 degrees with my wrist, preferably in this mid-range where my elbow's at 90 degrees, that's going to be the greatest amount of resistance in the actual movement. Now, like I explained on that back machine over there, that's an efficient way to train, because our muscles are typically strongest through that mid-range and weakest through the extremes. So because I'm doing this on purpose to target the mid-range, I want to stand a comfortable distance that allows me to target that mid-range, okay? Now, in terms of the actual execution of every rep, keeping that chest up, you can move through movement, that's completely fine. I don't want you rocking so much. As you start to fatigue, you can, you know, rock a little bit. And then most importantly is I'm keeping my arms locked in position the entire time, or keeping my shoulders locked in position the entire time. A little bit of elbow drift forward is completely fine, but I don't want to be, you know, hiking this up on every single rep. You know, if you're struggling towards the end and you're hitting failure, yeah, you can kind of assist with your front delt a little bit, but you want to try to keep this upper arm locked and stable the entire time. Okay. The focus for this, once you have the bench set up to an incline that feels comfortable for you or an angle that feels comfortable for yourself, next is you want to keep that chest up, lay back on it. You don't want to be hunched forward like this because you want to make sure that your arms are hanging behind your torso the entire time, okay? Reason being is this is going to allow us to target the bicep in more of a lengthened state. And I also want to make sure that my upper arm is perpendicular with the ground pretty much the entire time. Now, what I mean by that is I want this upper arm straight down towards the ground. I don't want it to be drifting forward like this through the movement because, again, I'm just going to be recruiting more of that front delt to assist in the movement as opposed to focusing primarily on that bicep. So I'm keeping my arms locked and stable the entire time, keeping that shoulder stable. And then as I curl, I'm thinking about literally just pulling that forearm to my bicep. That's it. So I'm just bringing forearm to bicep, squeezing, controlling that eccentric. Last set, guys. Squeeze. Oh my God. All right, guys, that is it for our back and biceps workout. You made it this far. You guys are real ones. Thank you so much. But as always, continue to work hard, continue to be diligent, be intentional with your movements. And as always, take it easy, and I will see you on the next video. Thank you, guys.